On December 31st, 1992, Sam Wheaton's father beat his mother to death with a shattered liquor bottle. His parents did not disagree. There had been no fight between them or other trigger event that might have caused his father to lose it. The man used to pour himself 2 fingers of whiskey every night, but now he swung the bottle as hard as he could. Sam would swear afterward that the sound the bottle produced as it struck his mother's left temple would stay with him. There was a dull clang and a brief echo. It was new to him because he had never heard that particular sound before. The sound of inwardly shattering bones came next. His mother's skull was broken. She gave a gasp, and her breath came out in a hiss. Eventually, her lifeless body hit the kitchen floor with a thump. It was a death symphony that came and went. Sam lost his mother when the instrument stopped playing. 3 doors down the block, there was another murder taking place, while everything around him fell apart. Jeremy Thomas's mother was slitting the necks of both him and his elder sister with one of her throwaway razors. Even though Jeremy lived nearby, Sam didn't really know him well. He was a year behind Jeremy in school. They didn't hang around much outside of those minor league games, even though they had played baseball together when they were younger. Commercials, no one was slain across the street by Jenny Sanderson's mother. Instead, she used the frozen refrigerator door to punch her own brains in while her daughter looked on in horror. She cried out in French the whole time she was doing this. Jenny had no idea her mother was fluent in that language. Precisely at 8:17 p.m. that night, several people in Porter's Grove, Indiana, and the surrounding areas all went violently and horrifyingly insane at the same time. It concluded at 8:25 p.m. that night. At about 8:20 p.m., Sam Wheaton's father turned to face him. Once he had finished whipping his mother with the bottle of vodka stained with blood. Sam's dad was an extremely elderly man. He married a woman who was more than 15 years his younger at a late age. Sam always had the feeling that his father had no intention of getting married, even though he never said so out loud. Well, until he got to know Sam's mom. It seemed as though they were meant to be together, even with their age gap. Less than a year after their first meeting, he had proposed to her, having fallen deeply in love. Sam's father was too old to perform many of the physical tasks that other fathers could perform with their boys. The body was unable to release the spirit, even though it was more than willing and truly longed to. Even something as simple as playing catch was tough for him because of his arthritis. He never felt guilty about not being able to play outside with Sam. Even as a small child, Sam knew his father was not to blame. He even began to respect the man's elderly age in a way. His father loved old adventure stories and had vivid memories of his own life, which more than made up for his lack of athletic prowess. He was just as devoted to Sam. In the end, Sam was saved that night by the man's advanced age. It was obvious to Sam that this was not his father when he turned to face him and clasped the bottle with his right hand. Not really, at least not in a significant way. Kind warmth and perceptive understanding had left his eyes. Whatever or anyone was staring back at him, all he was seeing was an empty shell full of craziness. Sam's dad stepped forward and let go of the bottle. Sam slowed his breathing and watched it drop to the hardwood floor. The glass didn't break, not even after he heard it crack and saw a dark brown liquid leaking out from under the lid. His father's fingers scraped against nothing, turning into claws. He put another hand on his chest. His breath got trapped in his neck, and he suffered a fatal heart attack shortly after his body struck his wife's floor. Sam's father only intervened to stop him from killing someone when his heart gave out before he could carry out the horrible deed. Even now, over 25 years later, Sam still thinks about that almost daily. How was he not able to achieve that? Is it really possible for someone to move on from such an experience? Sam has attempted to get therapy. He has experimented with medicinal subjects. He's attempted to bury it beneath enough alcohol to crack a fish. He hasn't yet discovered the answer, if there is one, to his problems. I've spoken with a few of the other survivors from that night. Nor have they discovered that elusive remedy. Approximately 8 minutes in total. That was all that was necessary to change the course of several dozen people's lives. For a duration of 8 minutes. You're listening to Dead and Buried Crimes, and my name is Brian Eddings. There has been talk about the catastrophe at Porter's Grove ever since it occurred. For many of the questions, the answers have never been sufficient. What caused that to happen? How did that come about? What happened to set off the events? Surely there must be one. It's not as though several dozen people suddenly went insane. The official statements released by the government are not quite clear. There are several speculations and presumptions rather than any hard facts. The majority of the authorities agree that an extraordinarily violent event of mass panic caused the horrific night. I mean, really, is it really such a convincing explanation? The fact that so many people have openly expressed their belief that the administration is concealing something makes sense. Many people think that the officials are hiding information. There must be more to this than a shrug and an accompanying "we don't know" statement. In the course of my investigation into what had transpired in Porter's Grove that evening, I made contact with several of the individuals who had generated these official reports. I had thought that I would have some trouble striking up a discussion or that people would be unwilling to respond to my questions. To my surprise, most people I came across were happy to help out whenever they could. When I went into the interviews, I was prepared for practically anything. I wasn't ready to leave them, knowing that every single individual I spoke to was being truthful. Although I valued the transparency, it also gave the impression that these interviews had come to a standstill. All the information known to those who worked on the official reports was contained in them. If not for sheer happenstance, the narrative would have ended there. In Hampton, Nebraska, I happened upon a local historian while conducting research for another episode. He did email other documents that described other odd episodes in the town's history, even though he was unable to provide me with much information about the subject of my request. The 8th of July, 1974, was one of these times. While the man with the golden gun was on display, a number of unconnected people attacked the other customers. Before the film had even been on for an hour, 8 people started physically attacking other moviegoers. About a dozen others were hurt, and 4 people lost their lives. It was calculated that the entire incident lasted 8 minutes based on the beginning and ending of the attacks in the film. These narratives contained statements from the assailants themselves, which were not present in the Porter's Grove reports. It forbade me from speaking and said it would not respond to any inquiries. It went on before I had a chance to consider my next move. The first nuclear weapon test was carried out by the U.S. on July 16, 1945, a little over 200 miles from Los Alamos, New Mexico. The findings of testing the plutonium implosion device, codenamed Trinity, were deemed sufficient by the testing authorities. The sand and asphalt formed green glass due to the explosion's immense force. Since this was the first test of its kind, it was difficult to predict what further impacts the detonation may have. For instance, the explosion area was larger than anticipated, and the radiation levels were higher than anticipated. The first 8-minute occurrence took place in the little New Mexico community of Christensen 8 days after the blast. 6 churchgoers lost control of their insane rage during a baseball game and started attacking other players and spectators. 3 people died, and at least a dozen more were admitted to hospitals as a result of it. Because the incident happened so close to the bomb test in terms of both location and time, the government sent agents from different agencies to look into potential connections. The people living in Christensen were unaware of this. The bomb test and the incident could be linked, according to federal spies. X told me that the brief alteration in the electromagnetic field in the vicinity was caused by an accidental detonation of a nuclear weapon. He did not, however, provide me with a thorough explanation of how this happened. With other people, the alteration would result in a terrible interaction because, in a little section of that area, the electrical impulses in their brains just so happened to be firing in precisely the right way, that is, exactly what needed to be. Put another way, some people's minds would briefly stop working, leading to an overwhelming wrath and lustful outburst. Subsequent research by government operatives revealed that it takes 8 minutes for the human brain to reset. Out of reflex, I attempted to ask one of the million things racing through my mind when X stopped to catch his breath. They continued as if I hadn't even said anything, refusing to let me finish or inform me that I wouldn't be permitted to ask questions. The government was pleased with the outcome, although it had not anticipated it. Authorities recognized its potential right away. It might be a very powerful weapon if they could duplicate the electromagnetic field shift and regulate where it happens. Once a device has been inserted inside an enemy base or town, activate it and watch as the occupants tear themselves to pieces. It was, of course, easier said than done. It was no mean feat, considering the recent nature of the first detonation, to recreate the catastrophic aftermath of one. It would be challenging and time-consuming to duplicate the outcomes, and the final product would still require improvement. Only a small portion of the residents in the approved region ought to be impacted, according to government officials. They desired for them to all be. That marked the start of a continuous series of experiments conducted on U.S. individuals by the U.S. government. A total of 12 experiments were conducted between 1945 and 2023. Every trial, according to X, used a different gadget, and each iteration worked better than the last. Since the trials are now in progress, there will most likely be more in the future. X then put an end to the call. 2 weeks have passed since that call. I contemplated whether or not to post this episode online right up until I hit record. If what they say is true, this is much above my pay grade. I'm not sure whether X is a trustworthy person or whether I'm being duped. I ultimately came to the conclusion that it would be best to compile all of my knowledge and provide it to your listeners so you could make your own judgments. Even if all that X has said is incorrect, it still gives the 3 8-minute incidents, which I was able to confirm before they got in touch with me, an intriguing new angle. Though I have tried, I have not been able to confirm the other 9 events on X's list. That's a different story entirely, though, if what X is saying is accurate. That would imply that we are being used as test subjects by our own government in a gruesome experiment meant to make people go nuts. That would account for my inability to verify or refute the other occurrences on X's list.